At sunrise in the high desert of Oregon, Scott Jones woke to a sound that did not belong in an empty land. It was heavy and slow, close enough to make his heart pound. Scott reached for the old rifle beside his sleeping bag, the cold air biting his fingers. He held his breath and listened again. Whatever it was alive, and it was standing near his truck. Scott Jones was only 26, broke and tired in a way that went deeper than his bones. For 8 years he had worked as a hired hand on ranches across Oregon ever since he left college after his father died and left his mother buried under medical bills. Dreams had once filled his head, but years of low pay, long days, and bunkhouses that smelled of sweat and old leather had worn them down. All Scott wanted now was something small and simple. He wanted a piece of land he could call his own. That hope had led him to a dusty community center in Burns, Oregon, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late September. The auction room had been full of folding chairs and tired faces. Developers and wealthy ranchers raised their hands without thinking, buying land for thousands of dollars. Scott sat in the back, quiet, watching, knowing he did not belong with those men. Then the auctioneer called Lot 32. His voice changed, losing its energy. He spoke like a man apologizing. The land was high desert, 240 acres, no buildings, no water rights, no road access. It was remote and unwanted. The county only wanted the back taxes paid. The starting bid was $25. The room went silent. Someone laughed. Scott did not laugh. His hand went up before he had time to think. A moment later, the gavel fell. Just like that, Scott owned 240 acres of land that nobody else wanted. When he walked out with the deed, he had $18 left in his wallet, and a strange feeling in his chest that felt like hope and fear mixed together. The county clerk had shaken his head and warned him. The land had been abandoned for 30 years. The last owner had died alone. There was nothing out there but sagebrush and rattlesnakes. Scott listened, folded the deed, and nodded. He had worked with worse. Reaching the land took almost a full day. Pavement turned to gravel, gravel to dirt, dirt to nothing at all. The desert stretched out like another planet, flat and endless, broken only by dark volcanic rock and twisted juniper trees. When Scott finally stopped, there were no fences, no signs, no proof that humans had ever been there, just silence. That night, Scott made a small fire and heated a can of beans. Above him, the sky filled with more stars than he had ever seen. Lying in his sleeping bag, he felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. That peace shattered before dawn. The sound came again, closer now. Scott sat up and turned on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark and landed on a shape standing at the edge of his camp. Scott froze. A horse stood there, thin as a shadow. Its ribs pushed against its skin, its coat dull and filthy. Its head hung low, legs shaking, eyes filled with something Scott recognized immediately. Desperation. The horse did not run. It could not. Scott moved slowly, his voice soft and steady like it had been with nervous animals his whole life. The closer he got, the worse it looked. Cracked hooves, open sores, a deep, infected wound on its shoulder. This horse was dying. Scott had no feed, no medicine, nothing useful. All he had was water. He filled a pot and held it out. The horse drank like it might never stop. When it finally lifted its head, Scott felt a strange pull in his chest, like this animal had chosen him. "There's nothing out here," Scott whispered. "Why did you come to me?" He did not know the answer yet. But standing in the cold desert morning, looking at a horse that had somehow found him on land nobody wanted, Scott understood one thing clearly. Buying this land for $25 was only the beginning. Scott did not hesitate. The desert was no place for a horse in this condition, and leaving him there would mean death. Scott lowered the tailgate of his old pickup and spread a tarp across the bed. Using a length of rope from his camping gear, he made a simple lead. The horse followed him with slow, shaking steps, driven by instinct more than strength. Scott supported the animal as best he could, positioning him so most of his weight rested against the truck bed. It was not safe or comfortable, but it was the only option. The drive back toward Burns took hours. Scott drove slow, stopping often to check the horse and offer more water. The animal never fought him. He stood quietly, eyes dull but trusting, as if he had already decided this human was his last chance. Scott named him Champ without thinking. The name felt right. By the time they reached town, the veterinary clinic was just opening. Dr. Ellen Ramos, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and calm hands, took one look at Champ and moved fast. She started fluids, cleaned wounds, and shook her head as she worked. The horse was severely malnourished, badly infected, and exhausted beyond belief. More than once she said the same thing. He should be dead. When she finished the first round of treatment, she gave Scott the truth. Champ could survive, but it would take weeks of care and thousands of dollars. Scott's stomach sank. He had no money, no job, and no place to keep a horse. Still, his answer came without pause. He offered to work, clean stalls, assist, do anything. Dr. Ramos studied him, then agreed. Champ would be his responsibility. Over the next 2 weeks, Scott worked every day at the clinic. He cleaned, lifted, learned, and spent every spare minute with Champ. Slowly, the horse changed. Weight returned. The infection eased. Beneath the dirt and pain emerged a dark bay stallion with strong bone and a calm, intelligent eye. Everyone noticed it. Dr. Ramos said more than once that this was no ordinary horse. The mystery bothered Scott. A horse like this did not end up dying in the desert by accident. He started calling ranches, asking if anyone had lost a bay stallion. The reactions were strange. Long pauses. Short answers. People grew quiet when he mentioned where the horse had been found. Finally, Scott called his former boss, Gary. When Scott described the horse, Gary went silent. Then he spoke in a low voice. That horse was known once. Victory's champion. Champ. He was born on the old Russell Ranch, owned by Douglas Russell, a powerful breeder before his operation collapsed. Champ was special. Everyone knew it. But after Douglas fell ill, his son Roger took over, and everything fell apart. Horses disappeared. Records vanished. Champ was believed dead. Scott barely had time to process this before trouble arrived. One afternoon, a man walked into the clinic wearing expensive boots and a clean hat that had never seen real work. His eyes were cold. He introduced himself as Roger Russell. He wanted the horse. Roger claimed Champ belonged to him, part of his father's estate. Scott said the horse was found unbranded on land he legally owned. Dr. Ramos backed him up. Roger grew angry. He made a call. Within an hour, a deputy and a lawyer arrived. The decision was made to leave Champ at the clinic until a judge could decide. Before leaving, Roger leaned close to Scott and made a quiet threat. Scott had nothing. Roger had money and lawyers. Scott did not answer. That night, Scott slept in his truck in the clinic parking lot, unwilling to leave Champ alone. He knew this was no longer just about a horse. Something darker sat behind Roger Russell's interest. The next days were spent digging. Scott gathered records, spoke to former workers, and uncovered missing horses that had never been sold legally. A veterinarian in Nevada confirmed the worst. Champ had been used in an illegal breeding operation and then abandoned when he was no longer useful. By the time the court date arrived, Scott had evidence. Roger had secrets, and Champ was no longer just a starving horse from the desert. He was proof. The hearing took place on a cold October morning at the Harney County Courthouse. Scott sat at a wooden table with his hands folded, wearing the cleanest shirt he owned. Across the room, Roger Russell sat with his lawyer, calm and confident, dressed like a man who expected to win. Champ remained at the veterinary clinic under Dr. Ramos's care, waiting while humans decided his future. The judge listened without rushing. Roger's lawyer spoke first, claiming the horse belonged to the Russell estate and had been taken illegally. When it was Scott's turn, the story changed. Scott's attorney laid out the records. Breeding logs that listed Champ as missing. auction papers that showed he was never sold legally, statements from former ranch workers who said Roger had moved horses in secret. Then came the testimony from the Nevada veterinarian, describing the illegal breeding operation and the neglect. Finally, photographs were shown. Champ standing in the desert, skin tight over bone, wounds open and infected. The room went quiet. The judge asked Roger a simple question. Did he have proof that he legally owned the horse during the past 15 years? Roger hesitated. He spoke about his father's ranch, about inheritance, about value. The judge stopped him. He wanted documents. Roger had none. The ruling was clear. Champ was legally Scott's horse. The judge also ordered an investigation into Roger Russell's activities. Roger stood frozen as the decision landed. His power was gone. Outside the courthouse, Scott felt weak with relief. Dr. Ramos hugged him, smiling. Champ was safe. But winning the horse did not solve everything. Scott still had no barn, no pasture, and no money. Taking Champ back to the desert without water would be a death sentence all over again. Scott sat in his truck that night, staring at the deed to his land, wondering if he had won too much and too fast. The answer came the next morning with a phone call from Gary. Gary told Scott what few people knew. Beneath that desert land was water, deep underground, but real. Drilling would cost money Scott did not have, but Gary had an idea. Champ's bloodline was valuable. Together, they could build something. Gary would finance the well. Scott would provide the land. They would share the future. Scott drove back to the property with Champ a week later. The drilling crew struck water at 300 feet. Clear, strong water poured from the ground like a promise. Fences went up. A simple barn followed. For the first time, Scott watched his land change from empty desert to living ground. Champ changed too. His coat turned deep and glossy. His strength returned. He moved with confidence, calm and steady, as if he knew he was home. Ranchers came to see him, then came back again with offers. Word spread fast. The horse that survived the desert became known across the region. Roger Russell's world collapsed. Investigations uncovered years of illegal sales and cruelty. The Nevada operation was shut down. Dozens of horses were rescued. Roger lost everything he had tried to protect. Years passed. Scott married. He built a small house on the land. Children learned to ride under wide desert skies. Champ became the foundation of a respected breeding line, known for intelligence and gentle strength. Scott never forgot the morning he found him, half dead and still walking toward help. When Champ finally passed away at 32, Scott buried him on the highest ridge of the property. From there, the horse could see the desert that nearly took him and the ranch he helped create. Scott stood quietly as the wind moved through the sagebrush. He thought about $25, about worthless land, and about a starving horse that refused to give up. Sometimes the desert gives nothing. Sometimes it gives everything.